The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everybody. This is Matt at Ohio. Janelle is here, Amanda's here, and Barbara is here from the COC also. I'm just going to jump in and kind of point out some of the changes in the new data dictionary, the new data standards updates. I don't really have a slide presentation to go along with it. I'm just going to pop in and out of a couple of sample client records or just make one up on the spot. Show up what the drop lists are that have been changed. We'll talk a little bit again about the project start date versus project entry date. And then we'll do questions and answers. And I think this will go pretty quickly and pretty smoothly. I'll go through some stuff and then I'll look at the questions and answers and kind of pop back and forth between doing things and checking if people are having any issues. See this. So I got one question that says, "Are we started? I can't hear anything." So is everybody else, is that now changed? Is everybody hearing me?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
very good. Thank you. Okay, so I'm just going to pop over into Service Point here. First things first, as I get into making a sample record, is that Project Start is called Project Start by HUD and by the new standards, but in the Service Point software, it's still going to be on your screen as Project Entry. So we'll just look at that. It's going to be conceptually different for those of you doing permanent housing, permanent supportive housing. Rapid rehousing folks are already used to this, having this a start date that's different from a move-in date. But for everybody else, you're really still just going to hit the add entry exit. You're going to put a date that they moved into your project, and you're just going to go with it. And in here, it's going to say entry date still, and probably along the way somewhere, the HUD reports are going to start saying start stuff, and you'll just need to know that it's really the same thing. And in a couple of years, when we get a new version of Service Point coming down the line, they'll adjust everything in the software so that everything on the screen shows you Project Start. There's not much else to it than that. So the issue more about it is not what the label is just that knowing that if you're one of the permanent housing projects, that you are going to have a date that you are starting your service for the client that is prior to their moving into the project or moving into permanent housing, and then you'll go in later and do an interim to put in the date that they moved into permanent housing. So I just made a sample record of a single. I would normally in my workflow, I would do a release of information, and then I would go into entry exit, and I would do add entry exit, and that would be your project start or your project entry, as it were. I'll do the HUD project type. I'll do today as the entry. Well, I'll go back a week. That way, if I decide to show an interim here, I'm not, oh, I'll go back a month. Not locking myself against today of an entry and then also today as a interim. So there was only a few changes in the drop lists or the picked lists. One of them was under gender. So you can see here some of the gender choices have had the wording changes to them. Under disabilities, the choices should be a little easier in the pop-up. They actually adjusted it for us in the final patch so that instead of just having them say retired and I'll still be there, they are now actually gone. So the disability screen is much easier to work your way through. You've got 2 questions that are required instead of the 4 to 6 questions that we had previously, although there are a couple of project exceptions that we talked about last week. I think if you're a PATH program, depending on whether it's mental health problem or substance abuse problem, you may still end up with 1 or 2 of the other questions, or that may be gone completely now. Amanda's saying gone completely.
Yeah, so basically, if I may pop them in there, but they're not supposed to be needed. The problem is the path report specs are still tied to those old questions. But my understanding from our national TA partners is that by the time you're reporting on data for this federal year, the specs will have been updated to not require that. So I'm kind of, I don't know, we may do some testing, and those of you who do PATH, we may end up tacking those retired questions back in there so that you can run the PATH report and have those numbers be meaningful to you. But in terms of a federal reporting standpoint, you no longer need those other questions.
Okay, good. So this would be a disability. There's only one or two things to answer here.
Oh, you still have to put long-term voice.
It's, that's.
Sorry, internal
Yes.
disgust.
So that's that. The residents prior to project entry, they changed the wording here for permanent housing other than RH, and they added one that was rental by client with other ongoing subsidy, including RH. Then down in the bottom here, we have a missing field. I thought I added it and saved and published it, but I guess I didn't. So
what?
There should be the housing move-in date should be here.
Bottom. You just have it out of order.
I must not have published it after I moved it up. So housing move-in date, this is also the demo site, which I was having some trouble with yesterday. Here, housing move-in date will be up here on the live site, and that's where they've replaced residential move-in date now with housing move-in date. That's the new version of the field. So you shouldn't be, most scenarios, answering this at entry. It's fairly rare or unlikely, although the possibility does exist that it can happen, so that it is on here in case it happens into that rare circumstance. Otherwise, you would be bringing somebody into your project either in rapid rehousing or permanent housing, and you're the only two that would be answering this question here if you move somebody in at entry, unlikely as it is. But you bring them into your project as a client that you're serving, and then whatever period of time, be it a week or a month, I've heard some permanent supportive housing folks say that sometimes it takes several weeks or a month or two before they move somebody in. You are going to have a project start date or a project entry date is when you officially started serving that client, and then you're going to come not in here in the entry, but after you have saved and have the client entered into your project, you come in later under the interims, and you add an interim review date of the date that they've moved into permanent housing. And then hopefully this one has it in the right place. Down here, permanent housing only, PSH and rapid rehousing projects. This is where you put in the housing move-in date for the client upon them moving into their housing unit.
And just to confirm, for PSH projects, your annual assessment date is within 30 days before or after your project start date, not your housing move-in date.
Project start date.
Some PSH providers have already raised some concerns about that, which we've shared with HUD, but as it stands right now, your annual assessment is due 30 days before or after the anniversary of your project start date, not the housing move-in date.
Non-cash benefits had a little bit of a change to it also. So let me save and exit out of here.
Oh, right.
So I'll just open that up so we can see. I'll go back to the entry and go down to non-cash benefits. And there are two less choices.
Hooray.
So it's a nice little simpler screen for us. And there's really not a whole lot to it. The big issue was the understanding the start date for permanent housing concept, knowing that you have to do the move-in date under the interims, the nice disabilities being shortened. Housing status is removed from some of the federal partner projects, but that's not on the standard HUD assessment. There's a couple other things, mostly federal partner based. So I don't really have much else for the HUD.
Yeah, I mean, I'll follow up with federal partner folks. HOPWA assessments, pretty much the same. PATH is pretty much the same. SSVF, we're losing use of other crisis services. And then adding connection with SOAR, and then the RI assessments are going to be updated. I'm redoing those for you because there's not changes to panic about. I mean, most of it's just stuff getting taken away, and I'll follow up, but it's going to be much more streamlined. I mean, they took it from like 85 items to like 55, so it's going to be great. So I'll be following up with you guys on that stuff specifically, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Let me take a look at Q&A stuff here.
Are both sites updated totally?
Both the Balance Estate and the Mahoning's HUD entries, interims, and exits for shelters. There's the shelter version, the 3.917A and the 3.917B, and the permanent housing or other types of projects are all updated with residential move-in date has been removed. The new version of it called housing move-in date has been added. It'll be in the right place. And all of those pick lists and the disabilities and the non-cash benefits are all adjusted now. And I did a bunch of that stuff yesterday in case anybody got in this morning and wanted to do stuff. The new things would be visible and present.
Federal partners, your stuff is not updated. I'm working on that. You should have everything by the end of the day today. So expect some communication with me. Feel free to email or call with questions. But yeah, I started working on the HOPWA assessments this morning, and then I'm probably going to do RI and then SSVF and then PATH. So we'll get it done today on both sites for the project types that apply.
It's by the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
Did we decide that on HUD ones people could just go ahead at the end of the phone call then? Is that where we're at?
Yeah.
Okay. Because I did the basic stuff. I mean, we could say wait till noon, but I don't think there was a reason to. Once I got it done yesterday, there was no reason to wait.
No, there's no reason to stop entering data because even for federal partners, because most of it is stuff getting moved.
Right.
So like the stuff you enter will still be there in the new spots.
So did we have a notion that clients that they already had entered into a PSH project, their
move-in date got populated with their entry date.
Right. All clients prior to October 1st, prior to yesterday, their move-in date their housing move-in date got filled in with the date of the client's original project entry from Friday going back to 14 years ago. Any new clients that you serve starting as of yesterday or today, you need to have their start date / entry date into the HMIS as the day that you officially started serving them for permanent housing or for rapid, and then you'll do an interim later for housing move-in date. For all of the rest of you shelters, TH, homeless prevention, you will do their entry date is the day that they started, yes, like at the shelter and transitional housing is the day they started staying in the unit or the facility, and for homeless prevention, it's the day that you started officially serving them. So we got some questions here.
Yeah. You want to answer the disability one, that first one?
Let's see. For the last question on disability, long-term, what is considered expected to be long-term? What is the length of time for that?
90 days.
90 days.
Yep.
Or more.
So as to calculating bed utilization and unit utilization, I see here there's a question about that, and definitely our reports are going to have to be updated to reflect that we're not taking a bed until the move-in date is populated. So it'll be measured. So for bed utilization, we'll be measuring from the move-in date to the exit date for if the person is populating a bed. And that's not how it is right now, but that's how it's going to be.
Right. So for shelters, it won't matter. It's still going to be their entry date is their move-in date, technically. I mean, they're not putting a move-in date, but the date in a shelter is calculated by they entered the shelter. That's their project entry. They're taking a bed. Same with transitional housing.
Yeah.
But for permanent supportive housing and for permanent supportive housing on the bed utilization, it's going to be based upon the move-in date.
Right. And the next question is about what is the project start date? It's the same thing as the entry date always has been.
Yeah, and then what do we do if the clients are added but don't find housing? You exit them after an appropriate amount of time.
Yeah, you exit them to whatever you think their destination will be or was.
And yes, clients can now be in shelter and PSH at the same time until move-in. The shelter, as always, should exit clients the day they leave.
Right. And again, just like with the bed utilization, we're not going to look at overlaps between PSH and shelter. We will, but we'll be comparing it from move-in to exit on the PSH side and entry to exit on the shelter side.
So I'm looking at a question about disabilities. Terry, I'm not sure I'm understanding your question, but I will just say what I know, and then if you still have a question, you can give me a follow-up. But if disability is required, if verification of disability is required for eligibility purposes for your project, then you need to have that documentation on file when you serve them. When you say yes. But if it's verbal report, such as for shelter, then you just reporting on what the client tells you. So, that's what I'm going to say about that. No, Susan, I can't show you an SSVF entry because I haven't done it yet, but I'll follow up with y'all when you can get in and take a look at that. Yes, the start date is the day you do intake for permanent housing, and
there's 3 conditions have to be met. They have to be eligible. You have to have a strong belief that they're likely eligible. You have to have approved, I don't know what you do internally necessarily to get approval from your agency to actually serve a person, but whatever, that has to be done. And then the client has to have agreed to accept the services. So there's 3 sort of conditions. And if you download the new forms that we put out, those are up across the top, so it should be clear as to, if you've met those 3 conditions, whatever date those conditions were met, that's your project entry date.
Matt, can you show the RRH pick list changes again? Looks like we might have gone through that a little quickly, and then we'll go back and check on questions.
Let me switch without closing the chat stuff.
Oh, just go in the corner, it'll make it small.
Okay. So the question was seeing the RRH type choices. So for at residence prior to project entry, where a client may have come from rental by client with other ongoing housing subsidy, including RRH, or that they came from permanent housing other than RRH for formerly homeless persons. That's in the pick lists both for residents prior to project entry, that they could be coming to your project, whatever your project type may be, from one of those locations with that new kind of language added to it. And it also can be a destination. It's also in the destination lists of a client could be leaving your project and going to one of those destinations. So those same adjustments that were done here with other than RRH and including RRH will also be in there.
So that'll make it a lot easier to tell how many of your clients, so especially for the shelters, I know you guys get asked that sometimes, like how many of your shelter clients went to rapid rehousing. So now there's going to be this much easier way of telling. So that would be good.
Yeah. So yeah, rental by client with RRH or equivalent, and then permanent housing other than RRH for formerly homeless persons, and that's in the destinations in this particular case.
So other than RRH would be PSH type projects.
Back to the questions. There you go. How do I open that? Here we go. So let's look at some more of the questions here. That was the drop down with the RRHs. Non-cash benefits is they just removed two of the categories. That was, which ones were they? They retired Section 8 public housing or rental assistance, and they retired temporary rental assistance as choices in the non-cash benefits.
So, in regards to Julie's question about waitlisting, I will go back to what Janelle said. If you've met all three of those conditions, that you can offer service, the client's agreed to service, what was the third one? What am I missing?
Paperwork eligible.
Yeah, they're eligible.
They're eligible, then yes, that's the start date.
Remember too, this is a new thing that HUD's doing, and then we do it for a while, and then they figure out if they like what they're getting or getting what they expect to get out of this. So this is not like immediately upon day one that you do it right or you get in trouble. This is, we're all trying to figure out, they've got this thing, they're shifting as they started earlier this year with the APR. They're shifting away from everything has to be perfect data and perfect, no errors and no questionable things happening in your old APRs to having an APR that has things that may look a little, more truthful, because they were trying to make us jam everything for years into ones and zeros and check boxes of these human lives that don't fit into ones and zeros and check boxes. And so now there's a shift in the way that they're looking at the data, that they want to be able to see the things that are happening to the people that you're serving and how and when it's happening to them, so that they can develop the programs and the funding still better to help the clients.
In regards to HP, no, don't put the permanent housing move-in date, even if you move them.
Right.
It's not how we're capturing that.
Yeah.
Scroll down.
So if you moved a new client in on Friday, then you would put, you're gonna have to make your entry date and your move-in date the same, because it's prior to October 1st.
Or no move-in
in this
date.
one, no, because the reason, so what happened when we upgraded the sites is they overwrote the move-in date field with all of your entry dates. But if you don't have somebody entered yet that came in prior to October 1st, then you'll have to kind of do that by hand and make their entry date the move-in date, and the move-in date the move-in date.
For
Yeah,
PSH.
For PSH only.
Right.
For RRH,
So,
you
For
should.
RRH, you keep doing things the way you've always done them.
So RRH stands for Rapid Rehousing, and you should be adding your permanent housing move-in date for RRH, your housing move-in date, when it occurs. So ideally, you're putting in an interim within 5 days of that housing move-in date with the housing move-in date. The only time you'd be doing that at exit is if your client exited within 5 days of being moved in, which wouldn't be ideal. So most of the time you should be doing that via an interim. This is being taped. Allie, I don't understand your question about relationship to head of household. Send me some detail.
Wait, where is that question?
Relationship to head of household. There was a clarification, this was from last week's slides, that if there is an adult in the household, the adult must be marked as head of household. So if there are multiple adults in a household, one of the adults is a head of household. But if you have an adult with multiple children in a household, you should not be marking one of the children as the head of household. That was a clarification that HUD wanted in this data standard set, that people were doing that. If you have multiple youth only in a household, all of the youths are supposed to be their own heads of household, unless there is a youth with a child, and that is all the household is composed of, and then that youth would be the head of household, and the child would be a child of the head of household.
Yep. On pit night, if the client's still in shelter, they'll be counted in the sheltered pit count. They won't be dually counted with PSH unless there's a housing move-in date.
No. Allie, no. So no, if you have a household with multiple adults, one household is the head of household. The other household member is spouse, relation, other non-member or something. Yeah. Yeah, just the household stuff, it's not really changing so much except for
Yeah.
youth-only households. It's just that HUD made a bigger deal in the data standards this year about listing out the things they wanted to make sure people were doing correctly with households. I guess there were some issues in the past with people who would have a household with a adult and a child, and people were listing the child as the head of household, which was causing some problems.
Yeah, like if the child was the one with the disability or the one with HIV or AIDS status, you would still put an adult as head of household. Yes, the forms are available. They're on hmis.ohio.org, and they are in Word and may be modified as you please. You want to do an interim demo since we had a request?
Yeah, we can show. Somebody asked to see the interim again. So let me minimize this. Cancel out of here. So if I've already got an entry into the project, now this is a shelter stay, so I mean, I would really be doing this under like a permanent supportive housing and I don't have a permanent supportive housing example here. I do have a rapid. So if I were doing a rapid and I had a client come in, I'm not going to spend too much time on filling out a whole client record. But under rapid rehousing, if you have a client that you've done the release on, you've done the background on, and they're eligible, you offer them the rapid rehousing assistance. They accept that rapid rehousing assistance. That's going to be the project start or the project entry date. So I would enter them into the project, HUD project type. I will go back and be over 5 days on my data entry. In my example here, I answer the questions about the client. I answer their disability questions. I answer their residence prior to project entry, length of time homeless, if applicable. Well, it's going to be applicable for rapid rehousing. Income, benefits, all of those things. I'll save the client. There will not be a residential, well, it won't be a housing move-in date. So you will leave this blanket entry. You will save the client with all of the other stuff filled in for their normal entry. And then in a week or two, as you have helped them find an access housing and they're moving into that permanent housing, then you come back to HMIS. You go up to the entry exit tab. You come over to the interims page here to add an interim review. It's just going to be an update, whatever date it is that they're moving into permanent housing. Say it's today. And then you come into this interim and you'll see all the answers here of what they look like from entry up until now. And you come down to this permanent housing move-in date is what you should be seeing. And that you're going to put in the date that they moved into the permanent housing here. And because this is going to be a blue question here, and I gotta check that. I gotta make that blue also. The heading's blue, the question should be blue. Mm-hmm. You're going to have to answer that if you have a household of multiple people for everybody in the interim, and then save and exit, and then you've got a housing move-in date. And then you can exit back out and come back up to the summary, or move on to other clients and do other stuff, or log out. Let's see. So clients prior to 10-1, you don't have to change anything for them. This is from new clients going in 10-1 forward. Nothing is changing for RH. You're already used to this.
Right.
Permanent housing, permanent supportive housing is going to start doing this now.
I'm not sure I'm understanding your question, Tracy.
Under the interim update will populate the first tab.
I think no, because the way we do our assessments and our entry exits is through the pencil.
No.
So, when you put it in through the interim, you still won't and shouldn't see it at the entry.
No, the entry is still going to just be the entry date. And if you want to see what you have going on for interims, you would just need to come back. Like it's always still going to show this was the original date that you started serving them with Rapid. And you have to come up here to the entry exits to see the full version of what the entry exit lines are, to see that, yeah, I have some interims. Yes, there's an interim in here that's an update, and then I can use the pencil and I can go and save and continue. I can see, yes, this is the move-in date. But if I exit out of here and come back to the summary, if I go back into the entry and review it, you'll find that the move-in date is going to be blank because it's in the future, 2 weeks from their entry. You shouldn't see that information. You won't see any changes here either. So let's see.
So at the clients, like we were saying before, so when we upgraded both sites, the Mahoning site and the Balance Estate site over the weekend, what happened was all of the clients that PSH had entered with an entry date of their move-in date, because before October 1, your entry date was your move-in date. So when we upgraded the site, what our vendor did is they took all of those entry dates and populated the move-in date with the entry date.
So yeah,
because that's what was happening.
All prior clients,
as a rule.
they entered your project and moved in on the same day for all clients who ever entered your project prior to 10/1.
Right. So if there were any clients, if there are any clients right now that have moved in, but you didn't have them entered on the day that we upgraded the site, which was yesterday, then you would need to kind of do that by hand. So you would need to enter them with your entry, with the entry date of when they moved in to the PSH. And then on their move-in date, you would also put that date.
Right. Only for those of you who have any clients you served before 10/1 that you have not already put into HMIS.
Right. But this is not a matter of course going forward. This is just like to handle those clients, those PSH clients that haven't been entered yet, that have already moved into their PSH.
Yes, I'm assuming you will be able to run reports in ART to see how long from start date to housing move-in date. We already do that for our.
We already do that for rapid rehousing, so that's easily transferred to your PSH.
So I will repeat again. If your client is still in your project for more than 5 days, your RRH project, for more than 5 days after their move-in date, then yes, you are going to have to use the interim feature. You are always supposed to be, our timeliness standard says that you put all information in within 5 days of occurrence. So you need to document the move-in date within 5 days of them moving in. So unless they happen to be exiting within 5 days of move-in, you have to do that via an interim. And no, you don't have to do any changes to exits prior to 10/1. The RRH drop downs are just going forward in destination.
The move-in date field is already in the data quality reports for rapid rehousing, and they will be, the logic will be adjusted soon enough to include the PSH projects.
And it will know the difference as to whether or not there are any issues with it for the difference of whether rules were before 10/1 and the rules are after 10/1. If there happens to be an issue with how it has to compare the dates and evaluate whether or not there's an issue with it, it will be sensitive to the fact that there was a different set of rules up until 9/30 of this year and from 10/1 going on. If you're having individual questions about specific cases, if you're still not sure, call us or send us an email and we'll talk through it again and help you out. I mean, this is when we got the data standards rules this summer and we went to we did some online trainings. We happened to go down and meet with the programming team that does Service Point, and we had some sessions about the data standard changes. When we set up these webinars on October back at the end of August into early September that we were going to do these webinars. We actually hadn't even seen what this stuff looked like yet in the software. So we didn't have an idea about what it was going to look like. We knew what the rule changes were. So we did this webinar on the 20th, and we're doing this one right now. But there's not really a lot to it. There's not a lot of content change. There's just a couple of those little drop-down lists, and there's this kind of shift in your approach to things in permanent housing and making sure that you're tracking the dates in the way that rapid rehousing has already. Yeah. So aside from that, if you have other questions or you have specific questions, contact us individually with those so that we can talk through things if you're still having a hurdle in trying to understand how it applies to you and how you run your project. I know I get a lot of questions at the trainings and the new user trainings that somebody will say, well, we're in this particular county, we do things this way, or we do this thing in this region, and things are slightly different about how you may approach things from one agency to another, or whether you work with an MHA or whether you don't, or whether you do everything yourself. But largely, there's not a lot of gray in this as far as what HUD wants, and the same with the rapid rehousing, the way that ODSA wanted this. The way the rules are about what becomes their date of entry or what becomes their date that you offered services to them is still really going to be the same, whether that you're serving the clients entirely from start to finish or some other agency is doing part of that work and handing the client off to you. It's still the date that the client was officially engaged with for services that they agreed to accept what you're offering to them is going to be like their project start date. And if you're a shelter or TH, it's the night that they come and start staying at your project. Let's see, we got a question here about the VI SPDAT stuff, and we're going to have to let that be done through the COC and how they're doing the launch stuff. So the different regions are gearing up to have launch dates. Chloe's going to announce those. As she announces those, she's going to have a document that tells you about what you have to do as you're serving your clients as case manager within the agency. There's a video from the HMIS about how you go into HMIS and enter the clients and do the VI SPDAT stuff. There's a VI SPDAT training that you have to go on and do a quiz and read and understand how the VI SPDAT is supposed to be assessed on the clients. And all of that will come from documentation and emails from Chloe at the COC. And I don't know, sitting in here right now, what the launch dates are for the different regions for that. So unless there's any other questions about the broader scope of this stuff, I think we're pretty good here. And then again, if you have individual things you want to ask about, feel free to call us. And I'm going to get in there and change the colors on some things and make sure everything's right. The demo site's a little bit clunky. I had some trouble yesterday getting in and out of it. But yeah, track us down and ask us what you need to know, and we'll make sure you're up to speed on doing stuff. And again, we're all going through this together from scratch here, 10-1, and we get to all figure it out together and make sure that we're doing things the way that HUD wants. And if we stumble into something that we really don't understand, we'll ask our COC or we will ask HUD, and we'll get a better answer for you. Okay, take care.